good afternoon. We are here at the Kootenai Pioneer Village today. We're here with Pierre Comeau, who is served with the Canadian Armed Forces in Afghanistan and in Africa. It's Friday afternoon, it's the 6th of June, and it's 2014, and that makes it the 70th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy during the Second World War. So we're honored to have Mr. Comeau with us today. So Pierre, tell us about some of your military experiences with the Canadian Armed Forces. When did you serve, and what were some of the posts that you served at?
Well, I served in two capacities. I first joined the military when I was 17 years old.
Right.
And then got out at 21. I was an airman. And following my first 4-year stint with the military, I decided to become a lawyer. So went to university, became a lawyer, was admitted to the Alberta Bar, and subsequent to that, I joined the Canadian Forces for the second time, first as a reserve legal officer. So my trade in the Armed Forces was military lawyer. And then I did what was called a component transfer. I transferred from the reserve force into the regular force, meaning full-time service. And I retired with the rank of Lieutenant Commander in September 2012.
Right.
I served 2 full operational tours, one in the Democratic Republic of Congo from July 2006 to February 2007, and then I served in Afghanistan as Deputy Military Legal Advisor for the Regional Command South of NATO in Kandahar, Afghanistan, from October 2008 and returned back to Canada in May of 2009.
Wow. So what were some of your experiences with the military and the things that you saw in Africa, in the Congo? What did you experience there?
Well, most people may not be acquainted particularly with the Congo. My deployment coincided with the first elections, post-independent elections since the early 60s. So it was a highly kinetic, very robust tour. It was under MONUC, which is the acronym for United Nations Mission in the Congo. An incredible amount of activity. Most people may not know, but of all conflicts since World War II to this day, the Congo is by far where the loss of life is the greatest. When I served at that time, there were over 5 million deaths, either directly or indirectly related to the conflict in the Congo. And in essence, it's a series of conflicts, one of which had its genesis in Rwanda, which is a bordering country.
Right.
And so my job was to advise the UN force commander on the laws of war. And similarly, when I served in Afghanistan, my job was advising the chain of command, in Kandahar in particular, as to the application of the laws of armed conflict, also referred to as international humanitarian law. So everything from dealing with detainees to rules of engagement to weapons systems to targeting, legal targeting issues, in essence is what I was tasked to do.
So you were really involved in a lot of the day-to-day military activities in the armed forces and trying to engage in a peacekeeping role.
Well, certainly as it relates to the Congo, Afghanistan was not a peacekeeping mission, it was a combat mission.
Right.
So I gained experience in both forms of deployed operations, very different rules of engagement, obviously, very different missions, from peacekeeping or even peacemaking at one end of the spectrum,
Right.
and then combat at the other end, such as when Canada contributed boots on the ground in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm a Canadian, obviously, and was a member of the Canadian Forces, I was actually seconded to NATO, so I had as much visibility to the Canadians as I did to members of other troop contributing nations. The UK, Australians, certainly Americans. So I delivered legal services to all military elements that were troop contributing in what is called the Regional Command South, which includes the province of Kandahar. So that was my role for 12 to 15 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right. So when you were stationed in Afghanistan, your role was right on the battlefront itself.
Oh yes, it's you move along with troops, depending what assignment. So I certainly served outside the wire many times, meaning outside of Kandahar airfield proper.
Right.
Yes, I have.
What were the war-type conditions like in some of those places in Afghanistan?
Well, Afghanistan was highly kinetic. So in other words, a lot of action. And my deliverables, that is to say, my work product, was in essence signing off on a particular assault or taking out a specific target. The laws of war required that a legal officer actually sign off that the target represents a proper military objective, and that the weapon system that's proposed by the client units is appropriate to the military objective sought. So my job was to say yes or no, this particular assault is appropriate. Here's the intelligence that was delivered to me, in essence a fact exercise or a fact gathering situation, and they tell me what the weapon system footprint would be, what sort of military assets, including personnel, above all what the civilian picture represented. And my job was the practical application of the laws of armed conflict as it relates to targeting. And so analyzing very quickly in many situations, it's a dynamic combat is by its nature. So you have to be quick, above all you have to be right. If you're wrong, it's a war crime.
Yeah.
If you're right, you're doing your duty. That was my job.
What were the conditions like for the military in both the Congo and in Afghanistan in terms of supplies, living conditions, food, things like that?
Two completely different scenarios. When I served in the Congo, Canada's contribution consisted of 6 staff officers.
Right.
So 6 Canadian officers would serve on 6-month tours, and we rotated every 6 months. And we had stellar conditions. We rented a house in the capital, Kinshasa, where we were based out of. But the Congo, even if you live in stellar facilities, the reality of living in Congo, well, first of all, you're in essence, a rainforest. What flows from that is it's very wet, certainly during rainy season. Breeds mosquitoes, and with it malaria. Malaria was rampant. In fact, I was the only Canadian during my rotation who did not contract malaria. But in any event, imagine Kinshasa, the capital, a city of 8 to 9 million, depending how you account for it, with no functioning traffic lights, no infrastructure. Power goes on and off several times a day. So even if you have, and we did, have air conditioning and refrigeration and computers and so on, your food spoiled quickly as a result of the electrical supply being unreliable. You imagine a city of that size with no really meaningful fire department, with no really meaningful hospitals. We were well looked after because we served for the UN and had our own treatment facility. But in essence, we were required, you ask about supplies, we had to buy our groceries literally in the streets, if we could. And given the conditions on the ground, sometimes you couldn't even leave your quarters because war was ongoing. But Canada really took very good care of us. We were in a stellar position in terms of quality of life. Was actually stellar. But long days, you had to wrestle with the climate. I went in July, which was a good thing, but I came back to Canada the first week of February. So I went from plus 30 to minus 30.
Quite the contrast.
It's exactly that. Plus the difference in time is also a factor. When I served in Afghanistan, I was at the time posted in Edmonton. So it was either 11 and a half hours difference or 10 and a half hours difference, depending if Canada was on daylight saving time. So from a practical point of view, half a day. So I would correspond with my wife almost daily, or certainly as often as I could. And all Canadian soldiers certainly had access to email and also, in essence, video conferencing technologies, Skype and the like. So it suited my purpose because I generally finish my workday, in my case, around 9 p.m. at night. So I'd go to the welfare phones, is what what they're referred to, which included the video booths, and it was 8:30 or so Edmonton time. So that's how we did it, and goes a long way in retaining your sanity.
Yeah, the outside contact is important, so.
Oh, hugely important. The support that we had from Canada and Afghanistan. When I served there, we had probably about 1,000 Canadian boots on the ground. What turns on that is, unlike the Congo, where we provided our own support. We didn't have cooks or anything like that in Congo. We certainly did in Afghanistan. So everything's looked after for you. All you have to do is go to war. Congo, you were responsible for, if you cared to eat, then you go get your food and cook it as well. But they're two completely different operational theaters. You also realize in both theaters where I served, because they're all multinational elements, meaning troops from various countries. Canada is light years, literally, in terms of the support, and no matter what definition you give to support, you're just simply so far ahead of the game that you're the envy, as it were, of troops from other countries. And that's also true in Afghanistan. So we had, for example, in Afghanistan, a Canada House, which is a building dedicated to Canadian personnel, where you had everything from barber shops to we had support personnel who arranged for all your travel, because at the mid-tour point, roughly 3 months in theater, Canada made available a huge benefit called the HLTA, which stands for Home Leave Travel Allowance. And what turns on it is they fly you basically from Afghanistan to your home
Mm-hmm.
or anywhere else on earth you want to go with and meet up with your spouse. And that's, it's a huge benefit. Not all countries have that.
Mm-hmm.
And the logistics of flying in and out of Canada you can appreciate.
It's very dangerous.
Well, yeah, and costly.
Mm-hmm.
And you're literally halfway around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Just simply look at the time zones.
Mm-hmm.
So in any event, that's one of the many benefits that Canadians have. Also, Canada established a number of years ago, certainly well before I got on the ground, a Tim Hortons.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no idea what a Tim Hortons means when
Mm-hmm.
you're at war.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And not only for Canadians, a lot of foreign personnel got to develop a taste for it as well. And Afghanistan was also a dry mission, meaning absolutely no alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going 6 months without even a glass of wine with your dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And not that that's so much an issue for most soldiers, but for some, you talk about the super spin dry course, if you wish. Afghanistan is that. If you're lucky, you get jacked up by your chain of command. If not, you get picked up downtown for any amount of alcohol, and you could just as well be beheaded,
Mm-hmm.
as being offensive to Sharia law. Conditions were nothing could be further from Congo in terms of culture, climate, geography than Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Based on your military experience with the Canadian Armed Forces and two different theaters of operation, what advice, recommendations, or suggestions would you have for people who are enrolling in a career in the Canadian Armed Forces at this point?
Well, it's certainly not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lawyer by profession, and when I decided to join the military, certainly as a legal officer, was in essence to go to exotic places and meet interesting people.
Mm-hmm.
So not unlike most soldiers. I also enrolled at a time where I knew that the operational tempo of the Canadian Forces was at an all-time high. I enrolled as legal officer even before we got on the ground in Afghanistan. And I'm also bilingual, and the significance of that was I ended up doing a number of taskings on the African continent, outside of Congo as well. So I served in numerous places in Africa. In essence, Africa being, in the post-colonial era, basically half of the continent were former English colonies and the other half French. So because I was bilingual, I was able to go from one to the next.
Back and forth.
And so I served extensively throughout Africa, the Middle East as well. And in terms of advice, it's just simply not for everyone. I know a lot of my colleagues, even lawyers, ask me, well, what do military lawyers do? It's a very different role that you play when you're on the home front, that is to say, when you're on domestic operations. And in some ways parallels the civilian practice. But I wanted to do international humanitarian law, law of armed conflict, and there's only one way you can serve and practice in those areas of law, and that's by being a military lawyer. So few lawyers would find that actually appealing for any number of reasons. As I indicated earlier, I'd already served in the military, so I had more than just a vision of what military life would be like. And, doing the right thing in life doesn't mean without consequences sometimes.
Right.
And I'm not immune to any of those consequences, but I wanted to do it. And very fortunate that it was with the Canadian Forces at a time where they needed the help of men and women who wanted to serve and put the interests of their brothers and sisters or even the nation ahead of their own.
So when you signed up for your first stint when you were 17 years old, what role did you play in the Canadian Armed Forces at that point?
I was an airman. I began as a technician and then progressed through aircrew. And when I decided to get out, I had served a 4-year period of engagement. And in fact, that's how I came to Alberta. I was born and raised in Quebec. And literally after high school, I joined up. I wanted to be a military pilot, but I didn't get it. They wanted me to go to military college if I was to do that. And I was too probably stupid, is the right term to say, for me to grab that, so I wanted to fly right away. And so there were a number of positions open, aircrew positions outside of pilot. I already at that time even had my private pilot license, so it's not as though I was not acquainted with aviation matters, you know. And my first and only posting after boot camp and so on, trade school, was Cold Lake, Alberta. So I got on the ground here at 19 years old in Alberta at Cold Lake, and served 4 years. I did not re-engage by reason only that I wanted to become a lawyer. And at that time, the military did not have a program to offer legal training for military personnel. They do now, but not back then. So I went to law school on my own dime, and with the exception of the years that I served abroad in the military, Alberta was always my home. So although I'm new to this area, Alberta is certainly my home. From a broader perspective, and above all, Canada.
Mr. Comeau, on behalf of the Historical Society, we'd like to thank you for your insights into the military history and the theatres of operation that you're involved with, and for your contribution to Canada's security as a part of our Canadian Armed Forces. So you help preserve the country's independence, and through this interview, you also help preserve part of our history. So we'd like to thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.